Hello everyone, welcome back to Powerful Nothing, a Magic the Gathering podcast. I am your host Daniel, better known on the internet as 2SweetMTG, and as always I'm joined by my co-host James. How's it going, man?
Yo, pretty good. Excited to chat some cube cards.
Yes, that's right. Today we are going to be doing a bit of a level up, kind of a little bit for me, if I'm honest with you, and hopefully everyone listening will get some use out of it as well. Today our main topic is going to be how to maximize the best cards in Cube. We're going to be talking about some specific cards, going over how to get the most value out of the cards, as well as the decks and cards to put around them to make the most out of them. But before we get to that, we have some other topics. As always, time codes will be down in the description below if you want to jump around. Our first section of the day, as always, is the news. We have just one bit of news today, but it's a little bit of a big one. Yesterday, at time of recording, was a rather big and rather expected banned and restricted announcement. So first up, we have Pioneer. So the changes in Pioneer are Khan the Great Creator is banned. Geological Appraiser is also banned. This card's only been around for a couple of weeks and already got the hammer. That's pretty quick. And interestingly, Smuggler's Copter is unbanned. So let's unpack Pioneer a little bit. So Khan the Great Creator, this is the Khan that it's the 4-mana generic. It's the 4-mana Khan that says activated abilities of artifacts your opponent's control can't be activated. And then it primarily has the minus that lets you search your sideboard for an artifact card and put it into your hand. So I'm assuming with this, James, correct me if I'm wrong, it's just the pure utility of the card as well as it being a little bit oppressive as well.
Yeah, so Khan is primarily played in Pioneer in mono-green Devotion. This is a deck that can create an absurd amount of green mana very, very early in the game if left undisrupted, primarily through Nykthos, with a tremendous amount of green Devotion and then ways to untap your Nykthos. And Khan did a few things in this context. It gave you access to very powerful hate cards out of the sideboard. Things like Pithing Needle were really important here. Things like Damping Sphere to turn off the Lotus Field decks. It also gives you, of course, access to just powerful mid-range threats, if that's what you want, stuff like Sky Sovereign. But crucially, it also gave these decks a way to just win on the spot. There were some fairly convoluted but quite powerful combo lines, generally involving the Chain Veil. This is the 4-mana artifact where you can tap it and pay 4 to activate each Planeswalker you control an additional time. If you combine that with then ways to untap that and get more activations, you end up with an infinite amount of Planeswalker activations, and you can win the game.
That sounds miserable.
Yeah, it's really... honestly, I only partly understand it. They always zoned out by the time they actually kill you. It takes them like 15 minutes, and sometimes on Magic Online they mess it up so much that they time out. But,
love that part.
But I'm reliably informed by people who know what they're talking about, but it does actually kill you. And then the static ability of your opponents can't activate artifacts was, like, in the right matchups, phenomenal. This was basically the big reason why Greasefang had a real issue with playing against mono-green decks, because the whole point of Greasefang is to return a vehicle. Khan makes you unable to crew that vehicle.
Oh, nice. Okay, yeah.
Yes, I think this is obviously, a ban that is designed to try and hurt but not kill mono-green.
Is it actually going to make it play some bloody green cards? Every time we've spoken about this, you have never mentioned a green card when talking about mono-green. It was Teferi Sets the Sun, and now it's...
I promise you there are lots of green cards.
Okay,
they never change and they're not that interesting. They have the 8 elves, the Cavalier of Thorns as the greatest for lots of green Devotion, Old Grove Troll.
Oh, I like those cards. They're good and green. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I think this is basically trying to get it to play a little bit more quote-unquote fair, but it won't actually be very fair. They'll still be making 15 mana on turn 4, but it's going to get theoretically, it should be harder for them to kill you the turn they go off and do all their big stuff, right? It should give you another turn. And it takes out, I think, just the kind of unpleasant play pattern of having this really complicated combo line, which took ages to execute. And it removes a nice prison piece. So I think this banning on its own is a pretty good thing for a deck like Abzan Greasefang, which has been kind of pushed out recently.
No, makes sense. Cool. So the next banned card, again, this is from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, so it's probably been in Pioneer for all of 3 weeks at this point. Is Geological Appraiser, 2 red, 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, discover 3. It is also just a lowly uncommon. So I've kind of vaguely seen this deck a little bit. It's played in along with the other cards that discover, so Trumpeting Carnosaur and Quintorius Canned. As far as I'm aware, it's like this. It's the cards that discover a load of clone effects, because the Trumpeting Carnosaur it's just an ETB. The Quintorius is an activation. If you have that with a load of clone spells, you can kind of just basically dump. I think the gist is you cast one of these cards, dump your whole deck into play. Something gives them all haste, and you win on turn 3 or 4. Is that the kind of gist of what this deck was looking like, James?
Yeah, pretty much exactly that. So there's and there are a few mildly different builds going around, but the sort of baseline version is you cast Geological Appraiser or Trumpeting Carnosaur. We'll use Geological Appraiser as an example. That gets you a Discover 3, so that's basically a Cascade 3, but it's on ETB. The only spells that can hit, so the only spells with CMC 3 or less in your deck are Glasspool Mimic, which is the clone, or Eldritch Evolution, which is the sack a creature, go and get a creature with up to 2 greater CMC into play.
I get it.
So whichever one of those you hit, if it's Mimic, you'll just get another Discover 3. If it's the Evolution, you'll go and sack your Appraiser and go and get a Trumpeting Carnosaur, which will then get you another Discover. You can't miss on getting another Discover trigger, essentially, at any point here.
Sorry, a quick rules thing. Is the way it's worded, because when it's the battlefield, if you cast it, discover 3. I'm assuming you're still casting the Glasspool Mimic. You're casting the clone, so it will still discover. Is that correct?
Yes. So you have cast your Mimic, right? Because the way Discover works is you have cast the Glasspool Mimic, and when the Glasspool Mimic enters the battlefield, it's a Geological Appraiser. The Geological Appraiser is going to check, hey, did you cast this card?
Yeah.
It's going to say, yes, I did. It was just called something different when I cast it.
Yeah. So this was the one that I thought that was worded like Cascade weirdly, but it's actually not. It does work this way. So that's very cool. I can see why they needed to nerf it a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, you get all these creatures into play. You can't miss, basically. And then the win condition, there are a couple of different ones, but the normal one was that the last Eldritch Evolution goes and gets a Doomscar Titan, which when it ETBs is going to give all your creatures +1/+0 and haste. And the nice bit of tech for, well, what if I've drawn my Doomscar Titan? They often also play a Golter Stampede Tyrant from a new set, so you can put the Doomscar Tyrant from your hand into play.
Okay, sick. That sounds very stupid, and I'm assuming, because this actual kind of, the ban bit we're in now is, I think, the window where it's after a set has come out. This is, I guess, a mistake they realized that they'd made and needed to fix it straight away, so this is actually kind of what this ban window is for, so that's good to see.
Pretty much. It was very consistent in it could present lethal almost always by turn 4. Very often on turn 3, actually, because this deck also played things like Magma Opus and Creative Outburst as expensive cards that you could discard and make a treasure to play your Geological Appraiser 1 turn quicker. I don't actually think this deck was unbeatably strong or anything. It did very well in the first week, I think, basically when no one knew what was up and what was going on and how to play against it. It is very disruptible by removal.
Yes, like one counterspell or something like that.
You cast your Geological Appraiser and your opponent just shocks the Appraiser before the clone has come into play.
Oh, I get you. Yeah.
You're done. So I don't think it was unbeatable, but I think it was just, do you want this check of, do you have a removal spell on turn 3 or you die in the format? Answer, probably no.
No, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Well, let's move on to a card that has been unbanned. Initially banned back in December 2019, Smuggler's Copter has now been unbanned. The Looter Scooter, 2 generic mana, 3/3 vehicle, flying, when it attacks or blocks, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. And I think the important part in this is that it has a crew of a lowly 1. So literally anything, the single point of power can crew it, and then you get some good looting effects with it. I remember when this was banned in Standard, it was just because it was just played in absolutely every deck. Was that kind of how it was in Pioneer when this was legal, James?
So this was legal for a very, very short amount of Pioneer's history. When they started the Pioneer format, they basically did the initial ban list by letting the community loose on all the cards and banning a bunch of cards like every 2 weeks or something.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't realize that. Yeah, Pioneer was introduced in October 21st, 2019. So it was a little under 2 months.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, God, this was a different world of Pioneer. I think one of the best decks was like mono black aggro with all the little recursive creatures and Looter Scooter. This is clearly not the world we live in anymore. This is still a very powerful card, though. It does a lot for 2 mana. It's colorless. If you have an abundance of guys to hop in the Scooter, this is going to be great in your deck. I think especially for Abzan Greasefang, this seems like a pretty big upgrade to me. This is a deck that was playing the Fiend's Informant as a way to discard its vehicles on turn 2.
Yeah.
You need to make sure you have a lot of 1-drops in your deck, I think, to support this, because you really want to go like 1-drop guy. Stitcher's Supply is obviously the best, but I think there are others you could play into Scooter attack. And then turn 3, you have the vehicle in your graveyard ready to go for Greasefang. But this also obviously plays great for your backup plan of just casting and attacking with good vehicles. Like, that's why you play the Seeker's Chariots, and this very much leans in that direction as well. So I think it's a nice new add for Greasefang, certainly, and probably for any other aggressive decks which can play it. But aggro is not at its strongest in Pioneer right now.
No, that's fair. I'd say kind of from what you've been saying, you've mentioned it a couple of times, is the Greasefang deck the biggest winner out of this?
I would say so. I think it's been on the downtick for quite a long time. I think, the banning of Khan and the introduction of a really powerful new addition for the deck seems like it's going to be hard for Greasefang not to get significantly more popular.
No, yeah, I guess we'll watch this space. I'm sure there's some Pioneer tournaments coming up where people will be sleeving up the Greasefang. Worth mentioning as well that the cards that have been banned and unbanned in Pioneer, the same is reflected in Explorer. So Khan and Geological Appraiser are both banned in Explorer. Smuggler's Copter would be legal in Explorer, but it hasn't been printed on Arena yet. So again, watch this space for that to happen. It'll be legal when it is printed, I guess.
Yeah, I don't understand what's taking them so long, but I'm sure they'll get them.
All right, well, let's move on to Modern. 2 cards banned. First one, this was very much expected in the last BNR update a couple of months ago, but we've got it now. Fury has been banned, along with Up the Beanstalk. So Fury is one of the pitch elementals from Modern Horizons 2. 3 red, 3/3 elemental incarnation with double strike. When it enters the battlefield, deals 4 damage as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers, and it has the evoke mechanic of exile a card from your hand to just cast this. Importantly, this one doesn't have flash, but I don't think that really matters because it's just a really good way of interacting with your opponent's board. But specifically, it was seeing a lot of play in Rakdos Evoke, more commonly known as
It's a
scam, commonly known as scam, by using things like Undying effects.
So the normal ones it plays are Undying Evil, which is the gains Undying until end of turn, and the Not Dead After All. They've actually tended to cut the double face card one,
Really? Okay.
just because that extra that extra point of power is really valuable, especially on the Fury, right? Because it's a double striker. When you get that counter on it, it's attacking for 8 on turn 2.
Yeah, and that's the main part of it, is that you don't have to have a target for this. You can just do that. You can pitch it on turn 1, and then just have it on turn 2. If you're not doing anything, that's having a 4-power double striker is a perfectly good thing to do at most games of Magic, and the fact this has been legal for quite a while we mentioned on this podcast before, kind of like that people have been expecting this to go. Do you think it's fair that Fury is gone, James?
Yeah, I kind of hate this card. I think it's a good thing for a format that it's gone. In terms of the impact on Scam specifically, it's the Evoke Fury Undying Evil draws were obviously powerful. You have essentially an 8-power creature in play on turn 1. They weren't the draws you were most scared of. The draws you were most scared of were the grief draws, right? Because they strip out any answers you can have for it. But I think it is a big enough knock, because the thing is, you can't put 6 Undying effects in your deck if they only work with the 4 griefs you have. So I think this is probably, there's not a reason to play Rakdos Scam specifically anymore, I think. Well, I think the scamming a grief thing will still be relevant in the format, but maybe moves to other shells. I think Orzhov is kind of interesting because it gives you access to Ephemerate. And then you can maybe also do like Ephemerate Solitude stuff, and Ephemerate is kind of just a better value card if you're in the colors.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's also a pretty big impact of just not having Fury around in the format at all, because it didn't just do the turn 1 scamming thing. It's also so hard to beat for any small creature deck.
Yes, any 1/1s are just dying.
And it's a really big part of the reason why you just don't see decks like humans or elves or for like in Modern anymore. They went from, I'm not saying they were, tier 1 before. They went from like humans were a very solid deck for a long time in Modern, and basically just haven't seen or heard from it since Fury's been printed. So I think this is a pretty good ban, just to hopefully unban every small creature in the format. And the format's still quite hostile to X1 specifically. You've still got Orcish Bowmasters, you've still got Ren and 6. Fury didn't just kill X1s, it killed X2s, and if you had 3 X1s in play, it just wraps the board. It was not a particularly beatable card for those decks, so hopefully those can be, if not the best decks in the format, hopefully they can be at least respectable things you can show up to a tournament with.
Oh, nice. And the other ban in Modern was Up the Beanstalk, 1 green for enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, draw a card. So actually, I kind of thought I'm assuming this was played with cards like Fury and like Grief and stuff, because when you're evoking them, you're still casting, they still have the mana cost, they still draw cards. What else was Up the Beanstalk played with, James, and kind of what was more the reason why it was banned, do you think?
Yeah, so the Up the Beanstalk deck, Up the Beanstalk basically was the evolution of 4-color Omnath deck, which was very popular for a while. So the big things trigger it, obviously have 4 Solitudes. You never cast 5 mana to trigger it. You never tapped 5 mana to trigger it, really, until they left game. You had 4 Solitudes. You had, crucially, 4 Leyline Bindings. That's the 6 mana O-ring that gets cheaper for each domain you have. So cost 1 color once you had all 5, 1 mana once you had all 5 types. And then you played Furies as well. Was kind of a core package of cards that triggered Up the Beanstalk. And because you're basically, you couldn't run out of cards once you had the Beanstalk engine going. Once you had 2 Beanstalks in play, you just forget it. And it actually got to a point where, because they have all this free interaction with high CMCs, and they really wanted to draw up the Beanstalk every game, this actually evolved into a deck that was playing Shardless Agents, no cards with 1 or 2 CMC other than Up the Beanstalk, and you just cascaded into Up the Beanstalk. It was quite silly.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously you're not playing Shardless Agents in these decks anymore, but I think this deck's still very good. You just go back to playing, basically you cut your other Beanstalks and you play the 1 ring in that role instead to get your crazy amounts of card advantage. It's a bit less efficient. 1 ring is a card that you can answer. The really annoying thing about Up the Beanstalk is that it's a 2 mana play that cantrips when it ETBs by itself. So, like, answering it isn't even good. The 1 ring is more answerable, but still very, very strong. I think those decks go back to playing One Rings and are still very good.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Yeah. They did mention One Ring and Orcish Bowmasters in the article where they kind of spoke about these banned and restricted announcements. Those are definitely the next cards that they're going to be looking at. But because we've just had these banned, I would assume we're going to see where the dust settles a little bit, unless every tournament from now is nothing but Orcish Bowmasters and One Rings. I think we'll kind of be. This is kind of where Modern's going to be for at least like the next 6 months or so, I would say.
Yes, I'd certainly imagine so. Although it was interesting to note, so when they switched to this new sort of cadence of B&R announcements, they sort of implied that only in the once-a-year fall release window would they be making many bannings.
Mm-hmm.
They said very clearly in this one, okay, actually that only applies to standard. We will be making regular B&R announcements in the window after each set release to all the other formats. I think they specifically said for Pioneer, we haven't banned anything for a year and a half. That was probably too long. We're going to be a bit more active managing this format. So, that lasted about, what was it, 6 months, 3 months since we made the announcement. So,
at least we know the dates of them like months ahead. So they've said the next one is going to be around March 2024. So that's about 4 months away. That's not too bad. A quarter of a year. Love that. There is one other banning we should talk about, just mention anyway. Monastery Swiftbit has been banned in Pauper. It was downshifted to common in July 2022 when it was printed in Double Masters 2, I think that is. I guess the gist with this is that Mono Red was too good and they needed to nerf it somehow. I haven't played Pauper in a hot second, James, but I'm assuming that's why. Does that make sense to you?
It makes total sense to me. I haven't played Pauper in quite a while, but as I understand it, Mono Red was already very good before they downshifted Swift Spear. Obviously, I upgraded it a lot. I would recommend going and reading Gavin Verhey's piece. There's a link in the main B&R announcement. He wrote a very comprehensive setting out of the reasons to ban this card and why to not ban other cards. I have to say, I haven't played a lot of Pauper, but it's actually quite an interesting read. I'm not going to just repeat all the reasons you said because we'll be here for half an hour, but it's very comprehensive. But if you're curious, I'd suggest going and checking out that article.
No, very fair. I do like it when they downshift cards like this to things like Pauper and Peasant as well. You do generally see downshifts in Master Sets, that kind of stuff, where the power level's slightly higher, so they can bring stuff down. From a queue point of view that I like anyway, it does give you access to more cards. So like we've recently seen Peasant Cube get some board wipes in a recent Masters set. These kind of things are good. They help formats. But yeah, marvelous. All right, well, let's move on to our main topic of the day, how to maximize the best cards in Cube. So a little bit of setup for this one. A while ago, I stopped buying multiples of cards. It was too much money, couldn't be bothered with it. But it does mean that all of my good cards tend to end up in my cube, so I only get to play them when I draft them. It means that I'm not really playing them in Commander, as it were. I don't get to play with the powerful cards that I own anywhere near as much as I should, and it means I'm a little bit rusty. And that kind of got me thinking. I kind of remembered that I host a podcast with a very good Magic player. So basically, the conceit of today is I'm going to be picking James's mind on how to play some of the best cards in Cube, what to consider, how to play them, what decks they go into, and just generally how to maximize the value of these cards. Because like I like these cards, you just read them, you can kind of get the idea of at a base level how they play. But a lot of these cards, I've seen people do better things with them than what I have done with them. Or maybe I haven't got the most, or maybe I'm trying to do the thing that I've heard about too much with a card and just overthinking it, basically. So that's kind of what we're going to do today. So we've got 10 cards for you. I'm going to pick James's mind. The first card we're going to talk about is a card I've played a fair bit, but I always feel I'm leaving some value on the table with this. So the first card we're going to talk about is Snapcaster Mage. It is 1 blue for a 2/1 creature human wizard with flash. When it's the battlefield, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. So just flashback means that you can cast the instant or sorcery from your graveyard and then you exile it. So when I think of this card, I think of just like lightning bolt, Snapcaster Mage, lightning bolt, or getting back or using it as kind of like a trick to get back a counter spell, that kind of thing. Generally speaking, when I've played this card, I feel that I'm kind of potentially holding this card in my hand a little too long. Like I'm trying to do the thing with it and not just playing it as a blocker. When you draft a Snapcaster Mage, James, what are you thinking with it? How do you maximize its value? What kind of things do you consider with it?
So I think for me, the thing that makes Snapcaster Mage strong is not how great it is when it reaches its ceiling. It's the flexibility of the card. It can do so many different things for you at different stages of the game really, really well. So I think when drafting with it, it's really important to have a range of different instances of sorceries. Certainly a lot of cheap ones, but some expensive ones can be good too. And ones that have different modes. If your things to do with Snapcaster Mage are just like Ponder, Preordain, Thirst for Knowledge, Fact or Fiction, that's fine. Those are all good things to do with Snapcaster Mage. But when you draw your Snapcaster Mage and you're behind and you need it to kill something, then it can't. So it's important to have those really efficient really efficient spells, so you can make Snapcaster a really good mana efficient play, and to have that flexibility of spells, so it will get you the thing you need when you draw it. It's also it's like a sort of force multiplier for the best spells in your deck as well, right? Time Walk's phenomenal, but 2 Time Walks will tend to end a game. In Ancestral Recall, but also outside of that, in non-powered cubes, things like having a Swords to Plowshares in your deck, which tends to be one of the best cards in most non-powered cubes. Snapcaster Mage is like you get another half a Swords to Plowshares, and that's phenomenal. And also even higher up the curve with stuff like Fractured Identity, if you draw your Snapcaster really late, you can get that second Fractured Identity, which will often be enough to win a game. So that's, let's say, how to build your deck in terms of maximizing it. How to actually play it, it's hard to give sort of, a couple of hard and fast rules, because, say, the key of the card is flexibility. You use it to do the thing you need. So it might be that your opponent is attacking you, had played a Ragavan on turn 1, you didn't have an answer, they're attacking, you have two mana up to block it on your second turn, and you just run out your Snapcaster Mage to try and block. It's not the ideal use of your Snapcaster Mage, but it's a hell of a lot better than letting Ragavan continue to hit you. You can also sometimes play it for no value to do things like pressure a Planeswalker or get the initiative back. That can all be very powerful, primarily because they don't know it's coming, right? The Flash obviously does a lot of work there. But there are also times when the game is not ending quickly, and you might be looking at your Snapcaster Mage and thinking, well, I could probably play Snapcaster this turn, flashback that Ponder, and that's going to be fine. That's going to be pretty good for you. There's a lot of games where you should do that. But if the game's going super long and you have, say, a Time Warp in your hand, or you have a Fractured Identity in your hand, something way bigger and swingier, you might want to save it to rebuy that card later, because that's going to have a bigger, swingier effect on the game, and you think this is a game that is going to come down to resources, so you'd rather use your Snapcaster for a card which is going to get you more resources.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. Thinking about it in terms of how long you expect the game to go is actually definitely going to click something in my head a little bit. I've definitely been very guilty about just only trying to get the most value out of this card as possible. Like, I definitely played a game in a recent cube where, if it had been Ragavan, I would have flashed it in and blocked. But I took probably about 12 damage from a reinforced Ronin when I was looking at a Snapcaster Mage in my hand. And there is a point where I should have just flashed it in and traded with it, but I think I had some big spell, maybe not even in my hand. I think I had like a Time Warp in the deck, that kind of thing. So it's like, okay, if I can do that and then this, then I will recoup with my Planeswalkers and win. But realistically, that's not what Snapcaster was best at in that game. It was best at trading with an aggressive creature that was pressuring my life total.
Yeah, 100%. I think Snapcaster Mage is the sort of card that really rewards you for not just relying on sort of your heuristics of what's normally the best things to do with a Snapcaster Mage. You want to be thinking about, okay, how do I think this game is going to go? Like, do I think this game is about card advantage and we're going to trade a lot of resources and whoever is left with the most resources is going to be able to close out? Or do we think this is a game that's about tempo and and actually like trading off with my 2-1 now is great, or flashing back this lightning bolt that to kill their attacker now is going to be what I need. You want to be you want to have a plan for how you are going to win the game, not just be playing your cards and doing the obvious things with them, you know?
No, makes sense. Just going back to some of the stuff you said on the draft. So, when you're drafting this, so this might be a bit of a stupid question, but I'm assuming Snapcaster Mage is a high pick in a lot of the cubes. Is part of that so you have more time to get the package of cards that work around it, or if you're kind of in that deck, you might have them already and then just pick this up?
Yeah, I mean, generally, if I'm anywhere in the sort of blue mid-range controlling space, even if it's early in the draft and I don't have great targets now, I'm going to assume that I will get them. But obviously, if it's pack 3 and I don't have them, then that's a different story. Then I'm not going to prioritize Snapcaster Mage. It can be... It's not bad in combo decks, but it's maybe a little less important because in those decks, you're often about, casting that draw 7 right away. You're not necessarily about that sort of value game that Snapcaster Mage offers. You probably don't care as much about getting the 2-1 body out of it, but can certainly still be solid there.
No, that makes sense. It's just flipping it around a sec. So say you're playing against someone and you've seen Snapcaster Mage in game 1. How much are you thinking about playing around like spells that are already in their graveyard? So say they leave up 4 mana and there's a counterspell in their graveyard. Like, are you kind of actively playing around that? How much are you respecting that?
Yeah, it's certainly something you should be thinking about. When playing around cards, it's always important to think about, say they have one card in hand, what cards make sense to be in their hand? For example, if they, say they like missed their land drop on turn 3 and then they played one on turn 4, you probably know that last card that they've been holding in their hand isn't a land, right, at that point. So they'd have played it on turn 3. And when once you ruled that out, it's like, well, it probably can't be like, a sorcery speed threat, because they'd have tapped out for that. If you think it's pretty likely that it's Snapcaster Mage, then yes, you're looking to play around those spells in their graveyards. So if it's, as you example, you used a counterspell, generally the correct way to play around counterspells is often not to play nothing unless you have something to do at instant speed. If you have something to do at instant speed, that's ideal because you can, say, pay your fact or fiction in their end step. If they then use their Snapcaster Mage counterspell to counter it, then you are free to go ahead and play a threat on your turn. And if they let it through, well, they wasted all of their mana the previous turn. So that's also really good for you. And then, so often, if you don't have a way to punish them like that, often the thing to do is just, well, I'll play my second best spell, I'll save the one I really need to resolve and throw out a bait spell, which is probably, you're going to be fine either way because the spell's going to do something. If it resolves, that's probably pretty good for you. And if they counter it, you get to resolve your best spell.
No, awesome. No, that makes a ton of sense. And yeah, that's awesome. Right, let's move on to our next card. Next, we're going to talk about Retrofitter Foundry. It is 1 generic for an artifact. You can pay 3 to untap it. You can pay 2 and tap it to create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. It also has, you can pay 1 generic and tap it to sacrifice a servo, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. Or you can tap it to sacrifice a Thopter and create a 4/4 colorless construct artifact creature token. So the conceit with this is that you can make a servo, then over a couple of turns, turn it into a Thopter, then turn it into a construct. This is a card I've had in my deck a couple of times, and I when I've seen other people play it, it is just frustrating and really annoying to play against. When I play it, it just seems to be pay 2 mana every turn to make a servo. And what am I missing with this, James? I know this card is good because and like yeah. I know in like artifact decks, like go wide decks, it's a 1 mana artifact. You can find it off of as a saga, which spoiler we might be talking about a little bit later. And it spits out more artifacts. That's kind of the base level of this card. But I've seen other people do much better things with this and basically just get more value out of it. How do you get the most value out of Retrofitted Foundry, James? What do you think?
Yeah, so basically how good this card is going to be is largely going to be a function of how much mana your deck makes. If you're a deck that is reliably getting up to a lot of mana pretty quickly, this kind of looks low impact, right? It's not like you're spending 8 mana and casting your Ugin or whatever. But it gives you that installment plan of it's going to do something earlier, it's going to help to keep you alive, and then it's going to really power up later. And this, as you kind of touched on earlier, trying to kill someone with a creature deck through an active Retrofitted Foundry when they have a lot of mana.
So annoying. Yeah.
Can be phenomenally annoying. So, like, often way you want to try and play this is if you're under pressure from creatures, you often, if you can avoid it, try and not just chump with the servos when your Foundry's tapped. Because if you can do it when it's untapped, you can then turn that into a Thopter. And because the stages actually get cheaper as you get to the higher end, like it's free to sack a Thopter and make a 4/4, then you'll cast 1 onto sack a servo and make a Thopter. So if you can, like, say you have 4 mana and a servo, you can either chump with the servo, pay 1, tap it, make a Thopter, pay 3 to untap it, sack the Thopter right away, make a 4/4.
Mm-hmm.
Or if they have small creatures in that scenario, they can't even attack you with them because you can just do all that up front, make your 4/4 and block with the 4/4. So it kind of pushes into a spot where, well, I can only attack with the big creature, but then the big creature just gets chumped and they do and I don't even get to kill their creature. They just turn it into a 4/4 anyway. Or in that scenario, you can be like, well, maybe I have more mana and I'll just make another servo because that puts you in even worse position next turn. So it can be a great defensive play. And then as you're doing all this, you're still building up your mana. So and that only makes this more powerful. And then at some point you will be able to turn the corner because you'll have enough mana that you're just spitting out the 4/4s. Also worth keeping track of the creature types that your other cards make. So, for example, something like the Is It Sahili, I think, makes servos.
Yep, Sublime Artificer. Yep, spits out servo tokens. Yeah,
exactly. So you can then cash those in right away for Thopters. You don't have to. You don't have to go through the stage of tapping 2 mana and making a servo before you get your Thopter. All this is kind of the more fair way to use this card. There are, I'd say, 3 cards that are in a lot of cubes, which go really nuts with Retrofitted Foundry. This is Tolarian Academy, Gaia's Cradle, and Urza Lord High Artificer. Because all of those cards will essentially turn each creature you make with this into more mana, which will then allow you to activate your Retrofitted Foundry more times, create more creatures, create more mana. This snowballs really, really quickly, like shockingly quickly. Like if that sticks around for a few turns, you're going to have like a really unassailable board state. And that's even if you didn't have another thing to spend mana on. You do this for like a turn, and now your Gaia's Cradle's tapping for 1 million mana, and then you go and cast your draw 7, you know? Those are, I'd say, the cards which turn this from a good card with a lot of utility, into something you're really planning around as the win condition in your deck.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah. I think part of it might be I'm just with Retrofitted Foundry just playing it in potentially the wrong decks. Like what you're saying about the first thing you were talking about was more kind of like control-y, grow into a board state, go big mana, and go over the top of them. Then the other one is also big mana, but you're doing it with specifically like those 3 cards that you've mentioned. Yeah, I guess I've kind of played it a couple times in just more the generic, you kind of go widey artifact deck, but not focusing as much on the big mana. So is kind of big mana what you're saying is like the key with this?
Yes, yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I think basically the more mana you have in your deck, the more powerful this card is going to be. It scales up really well, and it is true that it helps in the artifact decks as well. Of course, if you've got things like constructs that care about your number of artifacts. But yeah, I'd say in terms of maximizing this card on its own, yeah, it's mostly quantity of mana, and those 3 cards in particular, because with as a Academy or Cradle in play, your Academy fuels itself. Your Foundry fuels itself. It makes creatures and makes mana at the same time, which lets you make more creatures.
Okay, so yeah. That's the kind of scary stuff that I was talking about other people doing, and yeah, that makes sense. Okay, awesome. Love that. All right, let's move on to our next card. A card we all know is very strong. Next, we're going to talk about Oko, Thief of Crowns. It is 1 blue and a green for legendary planeswalker, Sexy Oko. It has 4 starting loyalty. It has a +2 of create a food token, a +1 of target artifact or creature loses all abilities and becomes a green elk with base power toughness 3/3, or -5, exchange control of target artifact or creature you control and target creature and opponent controls with power 3 or less. So I kind of get the 2 extremes with this card. Like on an empty board, you're just kind of creating a food, turning it into an elk to protect it. You're doing that a couple of times, start using them to either protect it or beat down your opponent, kill them with elk. Likewise, if your opponent has like something big in play, like a Grizzlebrand or a big Eldrazi in play, you turn it into an elk, you don't have to worry about it anymore. I think it's more like basically everything in between where I kind of could improve my play patterns with this card. Like the -5 doesn't come up that often. I'm pretty aware of this card. So you're just creating food and turning something into an elk. And how do you get the most value out of creating a food and turning it into an elk? I'm assuming it does depend on the board state. Kind of like, are you slightly behind? Are you slightly ahead? But what's your general play pattern with Oko, James? What would you say?
Yeah, so I understand the scenario you described. So it's the balancing act of my opponent has a moderately threatening thing. I play my Oko? Do I want to turn that moderately threatening thing into an elk that can then attack me or my Oko? Or do I want to just make a food and then with the intention of making an elk the next turn to try and block? Obviously, this is a lot of a good thing about this card is its flexibility, right? It does those different things very well. But the thing that really puts this card over the top, and the thing that it makes sense to try and utilize, is just the phenomenal amount of loyalty it has. Like, this is a 3 mana planeswalker, which when you play it, it can turn their most threatening thing into a vanilla 3/3, and then has 5 loyalty.
Yeah.
So you can take hits with it, and that is an important part of this card.
Right, okay. That makes sense.
So, yes, for example, absolutely if I have a Grizzlebrand, turn it into an elf. the time it gets more interesting, yeah. So, let's say they have, Hero of Bladehold. Still fine to just turn that into an elk, because A, it's so efficient that you can often sometimes double spell on the turn you play Oko. If it doesn't line up great on their board on turn, you don't have to play it the first turn you can play it, right? Like, let's say they have a Blade Splicer or something in play. Well, you shouldn't turn Blade Splicer into an elk. You shouldn't turn the 3/3 into an elk. Neither of these things are useful. If you just play it and make a food, they're going to hit it down to 2. That might be fine if you have a good follow-up play. But it might also be better to play your other interactive spell first, try and stabilize the board a little bit, and play your Oko the next turn and turn their 4-drop into an elk. And then against the non-aggro decks, it is perfectly fine. And it feels kind of weird sometimes, but I've definitely made the play a lot of times of like, they just have like a talisman in play and I have nothing, and it's fine to play your Oko and just elk the talisman. Because you can just aggressively go after their mana. If you know they're like a combo deck or a control deck, they're not going to be making a bunch of other creatures, so they're not really going to be pressuring your Oko. So you can just use it to like aggressively go after their mana like that. Which I think feels unintuitive, right?
Giving them the creature to kill your planeswalker.
Yeah, but that's that's part of why Oko is so great, because it comes in with so much loyalty, and both its abilities that you use for most are pluses. The food is +2. You know, if you play it, give them an elk, it's on 5. They hit it down to 2. But then you can make a food, and even if you have nothing else to stop that elk or block or anything, it's still on 4 loyalty. It can still take another hit.
Yeah.
So this is very contextual on, if they have a bunch of other creatures in play that are threatening your life total, and you don't want to elk their talisman because that's given them more of a resource that is important and threatening to you. But if that's not what their deck's about, let's say they're a big mana ramp deck or a control deck or something, you probably don't care that much about giving them a 3/3, you know? You'll at some point you'll like draw your fatal push that was dead anyway and just kill the 3/3 that way, right? And you can just start turning your foods which you're making over the next few turns into elks, and that's fine. And then the other final point of that was you can also be at the point where you really want board presence right now and you don't have the turns to wait to make food. Totally fine to elk your own stuff, even if, it was like a mana rock that you spent a whole card on. If you don't need it anymore, turn it into an elk. You've got a treasure lying around, turn it into elk. That's really strong because it gives you that board presence right away. Maybe you need it to block, maybe you need it to pressure a planeswalker. That can also be really valuable.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, that's one thing I was going to lead on to. Is kind of like, how often are you thinking about the +1ing your own stuff when you're building your deck? Or when you're drafting with Oko, like if you're in Simic, I know that you're probably just taking Oko very highly and putting it in your deck because it'll be good. But like in terms of like building around it, does it need any help, or kind of like what else can you put in your deck to kind of maximize it? Like is it like a thing that makes like a treasure on turn, or like a treasure or a clue on turn 1 or 2? Are you kind of taking those cards slightly higher if you have an Oko, or is that not really? Is that playing worse cards to make your good cards better? Or
yeah, kind of. You could use it maybe as a very slight tiebreaker if you were unsure of if you wanted card A or card B. This card plays kind of well with Oko, so sure, we'll burn that one. But basically, you don't need to think about it. It's Oko's phenomenal on its own. When those synergies pop up, they're nice to have. They're not something you need. They're not real. It shouldn't really be affecting your pick order that much. But yeah, there are cards work really well. So, for example, I had a deck recently, like a Teamer deck, and the had Fable in it, a Fable token attacking, making a treasure, that immediately becomes an elk. You can do that every turn. Sort of speeds up that really nicely. In maybe a more typical green deck, there comes if you're at a point where you don't need your elves to tap for mana anymore, you can turn them into elks and make them a reasonable board presence. That's nice too. But yeah, I don't think it's something you really need to prioritize.
That makes sense. Yeah. I guess the main takeaway with Oko is like it's not fragile. Yes, it's a 3-mana planeswalker, but it's not like other 3-mana planeswalkers. That's why it's good, I guess, or really good, I guess, is that it can take it can take a beating, basically.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, and the other thing to be aware, I think Oko is one of those cards where you're aware of the power more playing against it than playing with it.
Right, okay.
Yeah, that's so often, you're looking at your hand of like, I can like tinker for like a Blightsteel Colossus or a Bolas's Citadel, and it doesn't matter.
That makes sense. Yeah. It's kind of like the Thalia taxing effect. You don't really know how much work it's done until your opponent tells you about it after the game.
Yeah, 100%. And they will tell you.
Yeah, no,
at great length.
Yeah, and to be fair, maybe that's why with this card I'm not thinking I'm playing it that well, because it feels worse on one side of the board than the other. That does track it. All right, well, we teased our next one a little bit earlier. Let's talk next about Urza's Saga. So this is an enchantment land, Urza's Saga. It has the Saga abilities of Chapter 1, Urza's Saga gains tap, add a colorless mana. Chapter 2, Urza's Saga gains pay 2 generic and tap it to create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. And the final chapter, chapter 3, search your library for an artifact card with mana costs 0 or 1, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So again, I know the basics of this one. I know that you don't play it on turn 1 because you can't make a construct on turn 2. Definitely happened the first time I played this card and have not made that mistake since. Because you won't have the mana, because it has to tap itself. You won't have the mana on turn 2 if you're just playing this as lands. Also, when the third chapter goes on the stack, you can still use a second ability to tap it to create your second construct token. That's generally the play pattern I think you want to be doing with this, because you getting 2 constructs is, well, it's a lot better than 1 because you have 2 of them and they're both at least 2/2s.
Yeah,
that's good. That's good. And I know that the other thing with this is that with the search your library for an artifact, it is very specific. Like, it doesn't get artifact lands, even though they have mana cost, even though they have no generic casting cost. It's actually very literal. It has to literally say 0 or 1 generic in the top right-hand corner of the card for you to get it. Like, you can't get Walking Ballista, not that you would want to normally, but like, you can't get anything like that. It has to be 0 or 1.
Yeah, you can't get things like Portable Hole, for example, an artifact with a color's mana cost. It's really 1 or 0 generic mana.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm assuming as well part of the greatness of this card is also what you are getting with it when you choose. Like, how do you maximize the value from as a Saga game? Because I think what I kind of went through is like the generic kind of like play pattern of like, that's how you run through the card from top to bottom. But kind of how do you take it to being like making those constructs really scary, or like what's the best thing that you can tutor up for it to kind of make the most out of this card?
Yeah, for sure. So I think in terms of just playing the card when you see it in your opening hand, you really want to be planning out your next few turns as to when you're going to play your Saga. You say don't want to play it on turn 1 unless you have something like a Mox, which can let you activate it on turn 2. But in general, you don't want to play it on turn 1. But you also need to be, and then you can say, okay, so now it's the second turn, am I playing my Urza Saga? You need to be looking at the other cards in your hand. What does my curve look like if I'm not using Saga? Assuming I have other lands I can play. And is that going to be better or worse than playing my Saga, play a 2-drop, and then just activating Saga the next 2 turns? Because if the cards in your hand are really good, say you have a really good 3-drop to play next turn, well, you might want to hang on to your Saga for 1 more turn and play a different land if you have one. Also worth noting, you don't have to be locked into making a construct every turn. You know, if you don't have other lands to play and you have great spells to cast in your opening turns, you can just play this, tap it for mana 3 times, and it will go away and find you an artifact. That's also fine. Obviously, it's not why it's in your deck, but perfectly acceptable.
No, that's fair. Yeah.
Often, yeah, you know, you're going to be able to do better things in the first few turns sometimes than just make a Saga token for turn 3 and turn 4. In which case, you maybe want to hold on to your Saga. You basically want to play your Saga, the turn before you want to activate it, right? So,
right, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I think I'm definitely guilty of just like, I like turning things sideways. So for me, this is, it makes 2 creatures that'll grow. I don't want to get them down early because I can then play stuff afterwards. But I guess the thing with constructs, it doesn't matter when they come down. If you have the artifacts in play beforehand and then play them, then they're still going to be big later.
Yeah, 100%. And you maybe have more spare mana lying around later, right? In your later turns, you're more likely to be able to like make a construct and do something else. And then we get onto the like more deck building side of it. So there are 2 factors here. Firstly, how big are your constructs going to be? So you're really rewarded for having a decent density of other artifacts in your deck, or ideally stuff that can make multiple artifacts. Think about things like Third Path Iconoclast. Retrofitter Foundry is phenomenal here both ways, because it can both create a bunch of artifacts to make your constructs bigger, and you can fetch it off the final chapter. Things like Sahili Rai. And the other thing, of course, is, well, what are we getting off our Saga? So this is a card which I think gets better in Powered Cube, just because you have the outs. You know, obviously, if you can get like a Black Lotus or a Solving, that's phenomenal. Even just being able to get a Mox kind of means there's no downside to your Saga, because you can always turn it into another mana source.
Yeah, or at a minimum, you're not down a land by playing this, basically. You're not down...
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It basically is, it kind of doesn't go away in some ways. But ideally, you want options, right? You don't want to be locked into, I can only get mana off the Urza Saga. It's fine to play if that is the case, but in an ideal case, you want a choice of, do I need more mana? Okay, I'll go and get my Mox Opal or my Mana Vault or whatever it might be. Or, okay, maybe I have enough mana, maybe I need action. You're really rewarded for playing things like, I think Retrofitted Foundry is the best here because it plays so well with buffing the constructs and is just a thing to do with a lot of mana later. But if you don't have that, including something like a Sensei's Divining Top or a Spell Bomb or a Relic of Regentus in your deck, but at least lets you turn the Urza Saga into a card later on, can be very important. And obviously of then getting the utility of those cards. So actually it can be a bit of a nightmare for things like graveyard decks to play against Saga, because if they have that the Relic or the Nile Spellbomb or something in their deck, then they have access to twice as many, essentially. Because they can draw the Spellbomb or they can draw the Saga, which fetches it. Yeah, having the options from what to get in your with your Saga really powers it up even more. And of course, it means that if you have drawn one or two of the things to get you have earmarked as Saga targets, you maybe still have one more to get.
So you want at least a couple of targets in there. Kind of, what do you think about more like aggressive targets? Like are you ever happy putting like I'm assuming Shadow Spear is a fine card to get with this because that the constructs wear that pretty well. But like, are you fine with like a Bone Splitter, or is that kind of like quite low down on your list in terms of like generically what Urza Saga is like best at?
Yeah, aggressive things can be fine. And if you're in that aggressive artifact deck, you may well have some in your deck anyway. You ideally want ones that aren't just good on turn one, Something like a Bomat Courier, like it might be fine to get later, but that card is way better on turn one than if you fetch it off your Saga on turn 5, But more is always better because it gives you more options and it means you don't run out. But yeah, ideally you want to be thinking about what's going to be impactful for me later in the game. Another excellent one actually I didn't mention is Skull Clamp, because it's a situational but incredibly powerful card. So like a tutor for that card is a very valuable thing to have. And it gives you another really powerful, like proactive option to get off your Saga. And it means that if you have Saga and a Skull Clamp, it's like having 2 Skull Clamps in your deck in a lot of ways, which then lets you build around that Skull Clamp a lot more.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so I'm assuming with Saga as well, in an ideal world, you would see this early in the draft so you have more time to pick up the other bits you need. Kind of similarly to like something like Stoneforge Mystic just gives you more time to find your equipment to cheat into play with it. Similarly with this, you want more time. If you see this late and you don't have, like if you're in that adjacent deck but you don't have the targets yet for it, are you still taking this highly just because of the chapter 2 of making the constructs, or are you less worried about it then?
Basically, it depends on how big the constructs are going to be on average.
That's fair.
If I'm playing the land, it's going to make 2 2/2s and go away and not fetch me anything, then I'm not very interested. But if I'm reliably going to have a lot of other artifacts in play, then maybe I'm making them off things like Iconoclasts and Saheeli and Urza rather than cards that actually say artifacts. So maybe I don't have a ton of targets, but the constructs are going to like really reliably be big. Like if you've got Iconoclast, they can get up to the 7/7, 8/8 range very quickly. Then I might be fine just playing it anyway. But the bar is a lot higher if I don't have any targets for how good a Saga deck I need to be otherwise, how many artifacts I need to be putting into play.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think for me, just in terms of improving my gameplay, I think the main thing is just realizing I don't have to play this that early in the game. Like I can wait on it and basically let it. Yeah. I think what the line specifically you said was play it the turn before you want to activate it.
Yeah.
Don't just play it on turn 2. I think it's very telling that I said, don't play it on turn 1, play it on turn 2. And then...
yeah. Or any other turn of a game also acceptable, yes.
Exactly. Yeah. No, fantastic. That makes sense.
Owen, so the one other thing I think we should have mentioned up top when we're talking about how to play the card. So you mentioned you can use the tap ability and make a construct in response to a trigger. Just also be aware that saga triggers happen in your first main phase. So if the turn it goes to a final chapter, you're looking at your hand and you think, oh, actually, I really need to cast this 4-drop this turn, not activate saga. You can, if you float for mana in response to a trigger, you will have that mana in your main phase.
Cool, that makes sense. Let's move on to our first land. Today we're going to...
We literally just spoke about the land, but yeah.
Did we? Oh, it's an enchantment. No,
sorry.
All right. Let's move on to our next land, our second land of the day. We're going to be talking about Rishadan Port. This is a land. It has tap, add a generic to your mana pool, or pay 1 and tap it to tap target land. So this is another one I'm assuming might be matchup dependent. Some of the questions I have with this card, because it's one that I have in play and I never feel I am playing correctly, because it's basically what I want to work out with this card is like, how aggressively should you be tapping down your opponent's lands? Like, is it just something that you do if you have spare mana? Because that can be quite strong, but basically if you're not doing anything, you can slow your opponent down a turn. If you're a control deck and you just want to play big spells, you can just tap down a land of theirs in their upkeep so they don't have access to that mana unless they have an instant that turn. The other thing you can do with it is obviously take them off a color of mana. So maybe they're a bit of a greedy deck, or maybe they're just a 2-color deck and they only have one source of their second color. Taking them off a mana can be a strategy. But I guess kind of where I falter with this card is how aggressively should I be doing that, or should I just be advancing my board? Because I definitely find myself in 2 modes of this card, and it's always felt like the turns I tap out, I should have tapped down their thing. The times I tap down their thing, it doesn't matter. How would you play Rishadan Port, James? How would you get the most value out of this card if you had it in a deck?
Yeah, so I mean, the first question to talk about is, well, should you be sort of giving up on making plays in order to tap down lands? Generally, no. Because the thing is, even if, there's this one 5-drop you're really scared of and you tap down their land on their upkeep, sure, they can't cast that 5-drop, but what if they have a 4-drop and you didn't play anything for a turn?
Yeah.
That puts you so far behind. And then you might be able to tap down that land again next turn, but then they play another land and cast a 5-drop anyway. That's disastrous for you. But there are times when it might be okay to play a 3-drop instead of a 4-drop. But really, I think you default to, you want to put this in decks where a colorless land is pretty free, like mostly monocolored aggro decks. And the default position should be, I start porting when I don't have much else.
Right, okay.
Just because it's, you're trying to soul read what's in their hand, right? And it actually, Loki does get better if you have stuff like Get Probe and whatnot, and you know their hand. But assuming you don't know their hand, it's very easy to be like, oh, I'm really scared of this Wrath of God, I'm going to tap down their planes, and then they play like a 3-drop that, is maybe a little less good than Wrath of God, but hey, you gave up on playing your Planeswalker for a turn, and you'd be way better off if you just cast your spell. So I think, you default to use it when you don't have other stuff to do. Taking them off a color can be powerful. That can maybe move that needle a little bit. If you're thinking about it in terms of maybe you're so far ahead is the other time that you want to port even when you have other stuff to do. If you're like so far ahead on board and you're like, right, they need to Wrath this turn, or they need to make a really, really impactful play this turn, and maybe they only have, one of their colors, and maybe the cards you're scared of are actually double of that color, so you're definitely taking them off it if you port them. That's a more reasonable time to port. Or or if you're just like, well, most of the things I'm scared of are 5s. Really, I think I can beat every 4-drop that I've seen from them, then porting them to take them from 5 mana to 4 mana might be a thing you want to do. The other time is if they have lands with like Tolarian Academy or Gaia's Cradle.
Yes, I can see that.
Tap for
yes,
more than one color. Does actually interact kind of nicely with Urza's Saga against Urza's Saga, because you can port the Saga in upkeep on the second chapter before it gains the ability from the second chapter, and then they like lose out on a construct. Essentially, that can be a thing you want to do. But yeah, I'd certainly say be selective about the decks you play. It's I'd say in general, it's quite a lot worse than something like Wasteland because it requires that continual mana investment. But it can certainly be powerful when it's pretty free to play. You know, if you're mono white aggro, you're playing 16 lands. You don't need 16 white sources. You maybe need 13. This is a good colorless land you can put in that slot. You're hopefully a pretty low curve deck, so you can get out ahead, and then when you don't have super impactful other stuff to do, or because your curve's really low, you can like play a 2-drop and port them on turn 4. That's when you start porting them.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, so it is more of a So I won't compare it. It's almost primarily best when you're kind of ahead or you have nothing else to do with it. It's not something you should be actively doing early in the game, if that makes sense. It's more, that makes sense. Yeah, default of just play your spells makes
exactly.
sense.
Because the thing is, this is not an effect that is going to. This is not a long-term plan, right? Like as the game goes on, if you're not doing a lot on porting them, they're just going to draw more lands and play their spells anyway, but they didn't cast for last turn. But can be quite strong if it's I have a ton of pressure on. I need for you to not do something great this turn or the next 2 turns. It can be an effective strategy in that spot.
No, 100%. No, sweet. No, that makes a lot of sense. Let's move on to our next card. Next, we have Parallax Wave. This is 2 white for enchantment with fading 5, which means that it enters the battlefield with 5 fade counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove a fade counter from it. If you can't, sacrifice it. It has the abilities to remove a fade counter from Parallax Wave to exile target creature. And when Parallax Wave leaves the battlefield, each player returns to the battlefield all cards he or she owns exiled with Parallax Wave. So this is, if I'm honest, this is more one I just haven't really had too much of a chance to play with. I think I've played it before in like flicker decks or blink decks where you want to get the value out of flickering your own things. Basically, it's a 4 mana flicker 5 things, get a load of ETB value again. That's all good. But I've had this played against me a couple of times, and it just seems really annoying. Generally, I've seen this kind of just remove 2 of my best creatures for 5 turns, or realistically the rest of the game, because it is normally played in more kind of aggressive decks. Is that actually secretly where this card is best, James? Is this just actually just like a 4-drop in an aggro deck, or am I being a bit too Timmy with the blinky thing with this?
So I used to think of it as very much 4-drop in an aggro deck. I think at this point I just almost never cut this card from a white deck. It just has such a outrageously big impact on the board the turn you play it. Maybe like, hard blue-white control, maybe I wouldn't play it. But if I didn't have like any combos with it. But there are very few game states where this isn't effective, because I think it's being able to target your own creatures as well. Like that's not what it's fair for. I think what it's fair for is you're playing a close back and forth game. You have 3 creatures, they have 3 creatures. You remove all 3 of their creatures. You hit them twice with your 3 creatures and they're dead. And that's very hard to beat. But then on top of that, you often how it plays out is, you have a board, you play Parallax Wave, you get their best thing that's killing you out of the way, you start hitting them. But now it's like you just have this Parallax Wave sitting in play. But sure, if it goes down to 0 and then another turn. And
that's the really annoying part.
Yeah. It doesn't go away the turn the last bounce has moved. Yeah. Then sure, they get their thing back. But also, all their removal spells are now low-key pretty bad, because whenever they try and kill one of your good creatures, you're just going to Parallax Wave it out. And then often it transpires that, by the time that Parallax Wave comes back and it actually has like 2 of your creatures and like one of theirs, and maybe you kill the token with it or whatever, which is obviously just gone forever. And then sometimes Parallax Wave comes back, and actually you're pretty happy that it's coming off the last fade encounter's gone. So yeah, it's really that versatility, I think, that pushed me over the edge with this card. It also is great both with and against Planeswalkers, because if they have a Planeswalker, this will clear all the blockers out of the way you can kill the walker. But it's also like almost impossible for them to kill your Planeswalkers with creatures if you have a Parallax Wave in play. Because you can just, even if they have a dominant board position, it's like, if they send 2 of a Planeswalker and 2 at you, you can just kill the 2 of a Planeswalker, right? So then they're caught priced in sending everything at the Planeswalker. And then you can often still save a Planeswalker if you want to. Or you can let it go, but they took a whole turn off. So yeah, I just find there are not that many decks where this is bad. Also, phenomenal with Evoke Elementals.
You can just stick them under it, yeah.
Yeah, you pitch cast your Solitude, exile one of their creatures, and then in response to the Evoke trigger, you put the Solitude under the Parallax Wave. Also works well with Grief in the right spot. They're still going to have cards when this comes off suspend. Great with Fury. That can be really strong. Great at killing all their tokens. And in reality, there's so many board states in Cube where, they have walkers spitting out tokens. It wipes them out for free, or something like Nissa has animated the lands, and the lands go under the Parallax Wave and just come back as lands, I just find this card to be there's so few board states where this is actually bad that I now just put it in almost every deck. I'd say it's it's better if you have pressure before you play it. This is often a 4-drop you won't cast on turn 4. It tends to just get better as the game goes on. So I'd say save it until it's really, really impactful, and you have sort of a clear strategy to either you have a clear plan to win the game once it's in play, or you need to play it now to not fall too far behind. But yeah, I think there's if you put this card in decks, it will do work for you.
And that makes a ton of sense. I'm assuming part of it is just, also because it's that being at instant speed is really, really annoying, because you can just react to what your opponents are doing. You can, as you said, you can react to your picked elementals. There's so much more play with this card now than there used to be, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And Cube's just a lot more creature based now than it used to be, right? Yeah, and there's just a lot of strategies this randomly hoses as well. They go Hull Breacher Wheel, and it's yeah, sure, I'll exile Hull Breacher, that's fine. Or they sneak attack in their Emrakul, and you just Parallax Wave out the Emrakul. It's your, if you have a Parallax Wave in play, you can't be Splinter Twin, for example. It's it just sort of invalidates a lot of things your opponents can be doing.
Yeah, and I guess the fact that kind of you basically described there every plethora of deck, basically. The fact this is good in an aggro deck at pushing away your opponent's blockers and forcing some damage through, or in the more control-y deck, helping Planeswalker fights and slowing down your aggro opponent so you can build a board state and settle. Yeah, I should probably be playing Parallax Wave a little bit more, I think.
Yeah. No, I think it's very strong. I probably wouldn't put it in literal 0 creature blue-white control, because you'd rather just have a Wrath of God at that point, right? But in any deck with a reasonable number of creatures, I'm very happy with it.
So when you're drafting this, kind of when you're drafting with this, is the flicking your own thing getting value ever really in your mind, or is it just it's a good card as long as you have some creatures, it'll do work?
Oh yeah, no. It's definitely in my mind. I'm I will probably play this card if I don't have good things to flicker. But when I'm picking between 2 cards, if one of them is really good with Parallax Wave, like a Solitude, or a even something like a Spellseeker, you can get the second trigger off that. That's definitely something I'm thinking about as I'm drafting.
Okay, nice. Right, from one enchantment to another one. Next, we have Recurring Nightmare. So this is 2 and a black for enchantment. Sacrifice a creature. Return Recurring Nightmare to its owner's hand. Put target creature card from your graveyard into play. Play this ability only as a sorcery. That's probably been errated a little bit. So this is one that, because it's been banned in Commander, and it's taken quite highly in my cube, actually, so don't really get to play with it that much. I think the main thing with this is kind of base level, it's a reanimate with some extra hoops. It's a reanimate, but you need a creature in play as well as in your graveyard. It's banned in Commander. How do you build around this in Cube to get it to the point where it's justified being banned in a format like Commander? This isn't. I'm assuming this one out of all of the ones he's spoken about isn't just about the card itself. It's about what is going along with it. It's like the deck that it's in. This is it's a lot slower than a Reanimate or Animate Dead, but it's also repeatable. So what do I need to do to get the most out of this card, James? Kind of like what? Am I right in saying it's the shell or?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with it's repeatable. This card is an engine on it in the right context, So I think there's sort of two spots where this card goes. One of them is if you're playing a conventional reanimated deck where you're just trying to reanimate an Archon of Cruelty, and crucially you have enough cheap creatures to sacrifice. Maybe you're playing your Putrid Imp or your Jace Vryn's Prodigy or whatever. You have some stuff lying around. Then Recurring Nightmare will be a fine reanimation spell in your deck, but I mean, significantly worse than Necromancy, for example, because in that spot, you don't necessarily care about getting the second reanimate off it, because the first one's often going to be good enough. Sometimes it will matter, but not too often. And then it will be a card that you will play, but it's probably worse than something like Necromancy in that spot. The spot where it's better than Necromancy, which I'm just sort of using as a comparison because it's the same mana cost, is if your plan is not to use this to reanimate an 8-drop every time, you're doing this as a value. So, for example, you play your Eternal Witness, and then say you grief them on turn 2, then turn 3 you e-whip back a grief, you grief them again. And then turn 4 you can play your Recurring Nightmare, sack Eternal Witness, get back, put grief into play, grief them again.
Right, okay, yeah.
And then the next turn you can Recurring Nightmare, sack your grief, get back Eternal Witness. Eternal Witness can get back. You've probably griefed them enough by this stage. Now we can get back a removal spell or whatever that we played, right? You're just getting so much value each time. And you're not necessarily going to be able to do this every turn from turn 3. But as a sort of late game engine, you kind of can't grind through this stuff, because it comes back to your hand. You're just going to keep doing it. If you're just basically what you're doing is you're just moving creatures with good ETB effects sort of between the graveyard and the battlefield and triggering those effects each time. And what you end up with is a kind of slow value engine, but kind of unbeatable once it gets going sometimes, say it's great with, for example, something like Shriekmaw puts itself in the graveyard and then you Recurring Nightmare it back, kill another thing. Then it gives you something to night away, get something else back, get some more value. It's the value drain just sort of doesn't really stop. So you're prioritizing Evoke Elementals are phenomenal here. We say that about a lot of cards because Evoke Elementals are phenomenal. But also just creatures with good enters the battlefield's abilities. The ones that put themselves in the graveyard are great.
Does Recurring Nightmare kind of become your plan once you have it in play? Is that kind of primarily what you're doing from then on, or if you have better stuff? I guess I'm trying to work out kind of what is better than just doing those loops and stuff. Obviously, just playing a 6-drop if you can play a powerful 6-drop, I guess is better. But kind of how much of your game plan from the time Recurring Nightmare is available to you should you be focusing on? I'd
say if the tools you have to Nightmare are doing the job for you, then a lot of the time you can just keep doing that, because also, you get more mana, you can start doing this multiple times a turn. And then it's going to get really silly. Obviously, you don't lock yourself in. Don't say, all I'm doing the rest of this game is casting Recurring Nightmare. Sometimes you want to take a turn off and cast a powerful non-creature spell, or maybe just hard cast something so you couldn't find a way to put it into your graveyard. And then if they kill it, you can just Nightmare it back later anyway, so you don't care. But when you get these good engines going, the nice thing is at that point you almost don't need to draw any more cards. You could draw lands off the top of your deck from the rest of the game and still be fine because you can just keep casting Recurring Nightmare and it's going to be great. But I will say it's it can be kind of slow, and and like kind of fiddly to set up, and you need to be drafting around it with, there's a lot of moving pieces here, right? Because you need like multiple creatures to be moving in and out of play, good into the battlefield's effects, hopefully like a proactive way to put something in the graveyard, because it's very easy to just say, oh, and then my opponent's going to kill my Eternal Witness and then I'll get it back. And it's like, yeah, but like they're not going to dismember your Eternal Witness. And to be honest, if you chump attack with your Eternal Witness into them, they'll probably just like figure out what's up and not block it. So like having some proactive ways to put stuff in the graveyard certainly helps a lot as well. And so the last thing I was going to say is, if you're in that space, it is also, and you have like good looting and stuff, also fine to just like put in a rando Archon of Cruelty or whatever, because that's a nice way to turbo it as well. Yeah,
it's still a reanimate spell. That makes sense. But what you're saying about putting stuff into the graveyard, I'm assuming that is why in a lot of strategies it comes along with something like Survival of the Fittest, because that is not only putting something into your graveyard, but it's also finding the best utility piece from your deck and putting it into your hand that you can then put into the graveyard and then bring it back into play.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. I think that's maybe like the most consistent way of setting up all this stuff. But it does have the downside that, you need to be trying to build your deck in such a way where like Survival isn't terrible if you don't draw Nightmare, and Nightmare isn't terrible if you don't draw Survival. But yeah, no, Survival Nightmare's kind of ridiculous. It's as long as you're not like immediately dead, that will win you the game very quickly. Because just whatever problem your opponent is presenting, you're going to be able to find the answer to it and put it into play. I will say that as a strategy, this is in like the most powerful cubes, like Powered Cube, and I think even to a certain extent in your cube now, this can be a little slow. It can be a little fiddly. You have to try really hard to just not be dead at this point. But if you're take it down like a little bit on the power notch, then this can certainly be a really strong strategy.
I do agree, because in theory, for this to curve out correctly, you in theory have played a 2-mana enchantment that doesn't give you value straight away, and then you've played a 3-mana enchantment that doesn't give you value strate away. I know they're very strong and they have abilities to give them that make the value happen, but yeah, I do get that you are effectively taking 2 turns off playing creatures.
Yeah. Often the way you want to be viewing it is like, once you have played some cheap spells and stabilized, this is then your late game value engine. It's not like you don't necessarily want to be going turn 2 Survival, turn 3 Nightmare,
No, yeah, 100%. That makes a ton of sense. All right, let's move on to our next Planeswalkers. Part of this might just be I have an issue playing with Planeswalkers, but next up we have Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. This is 3 white and a blue for a legendary Planeswalker Teferi with 4 starting loyalty. There's a +1 of draw a card at the beginning of your next end step, untap 2 lands, a -3 of put target non-land permanent into its owner's library third from top, and a -8 of you get an emblem with whenever you draw a card, exile target permanent opponent controls. So, like with Oko, I know this card is very board dependent. Again, on an empty board, you're just going to uptick, try and protect it. Untapping 2 lands in cube, there's so many, like, most of the good removal, most of the good counter magic, you will have up if you have it in your hand with that 2 mana. And then if there's something big and scary on the board, again, you can downtick and remove the biggest threat. You can remove the thing that cheats into play. You can answer it, that kind of thing. But I guess my questions with this is probably like, how do you break your board stall with this card? Or how do you use it to bring you back if you are slightly behind? That's kind of my main thing with big Tefers here.
So I think with this card, obviously the first and second abilities are both powerful. You probably want to bias towards upticking the turn you play it more than you think you do. Okay. Because if you play it and you tuck something, and sometimes you will do that, because sometimes there's a thing you just need that needs to go away immediately. But if they just then attack this and kill it, or lightning bolt it or whatever, you kind of just played a very expensive removal spell, right? And the uptick, if you can play it uptick and have it not die, it's phenomenal. If you have any sort of 1 or 2 mana instant speed interaction, this card gets so much better. The sequence of play my Teferi, uptick it, untap 2 lands, dismember your creature, or have a counter spell up is so hard to beat. Because really the whole challenge with this card, in my experience, is just untapping. Like, once you untap with this card, you're getting so much value, you're getting so much mana. It's if your deck is built with some instant speed interaction in it, it's gonna carry you a lot of the way. It's not the best card if you're like really, really behind on board. Absolutely, you kind of want to play this, like maybe you play a sweeper, maybe you kill one of their creatures, and then the next turn, you can play this, untap 2 lands, path the other creature. Now you're really in business, right? But yeah, if just try and navigate a route to untapping with Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and I find it will generally pay you back, because you'll just find so much more interaction if your deck is built correctly, by which I mean it's good in many decks, but it plays really well with interaction. Yeah.
It's a blue-white card. It is in the realm of cheap counter magic, cheap interaction. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, are you specifically working towards the ultimate here, or is just drawing a card and having mana on their turn good enough, or are you aiming to ultimate it?
The ultimate, I find, it's phenomenal. It will win you the game. It's incredibly rare people beat the Teferi ultimate. But in reality, you've kind of already won the game most of the time when you can ultimate Teferi. So that means this is stuck in play for like a bunch of turns and they've not been able to attack it.
Yeah, you've got at least like 4 extra cards and 8 additional mana.
Exactly. Like you're going to have found, even if they're a combo deck, you've probably found interactions stop them. If they're a like creature-based deck, they clearly don't have creatures in play, or they'd have used them to attack Teferi. So you've kind of won that game already, right? But it's nice that it gives you an actual win condition. But Teferi can actually, Teferi Ultimate can basically be your win.
Yeah, can you explain the super unbelievably grindy win condition of where this just tucks itself? Like, I know there's a thing of kind of like there's no cards left in the library or something like that, and this is like always the last card that you draw. But what is that, James?
Yeah, it's very silly. So basically, you only want to do this when you have the Teferi emblem, and you've probably had it for a couple of turns. They don't have many lands left.
Yep. Okay.
You've drawn a lot of your deck, and but not sometimes in that spot you can be worried in your control deck of, oh, maybe they exiled my Consecrated Sphinx or whatever you had. Not Consecrated Sphinx anymore, but or your Celestial Colonnade, whatever you're planning to win the game with. And you're worried about decking yourself, right? And it is quite nice that Teferi actually stops you decking yourself, because if you've got to a point where you've got your Teferi emblem, you're like exiling their land every turn because they've not played anything relevant, or you're exiling whatever they played. You can at that point just start minusing Teferi on itself. It will put it third from bottom in your deck, but if you don't have a library, then that's just going to be on top of the deck. The next turn, you'll draw Teferi, exile one of their things if they've got any lands left, and play Teferi again, put it on top of your deck again. Your opponent's never going to get to more than one permanent because you're just exiling whatever they play every turn. And eventually your opponent will naturally deck themselves.
Phenomenal. Have you won a game of Magic that way, James?
Oh yeah, this was a very, very real thing in a particular standard format with a very all in blue white control deck without any other win conditions. And this is a very real thing. I really enjoyed myself. I'm not sure my opponents did.
Boo.
I like blue white control. No one could stop me. I will just give as a word of advice to people: if your opponent's like emblemed their Teferi and are exiling your lands every turn, and you don't have a way to kill them, just concede. Go, you can go drink your favorite beverage, go for a walk, do whatever you like. You don't need to sit there and watch your opponent put Teferi on top of their library for 20 turns. I would suggest. I will say the mirrors with that deck were a bit of a nightmare, though.
Yes,
trying to not unintentionally draw games was quite a challenge.
Fair. Miserable.
Misery is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, I think that was around the time I briefly considered playing Standard. maybe my wife saved me by stealing the standard deck from me. So,
Yeah, sounds reasonable.
Actually, no, it would have been that time because there was a Goblin Chain Whirler in it. Okay, good. Yeah, I was definitely saved. Thank you, wifey. All right, let's move on to another card. Next up, so our penultimate card for the day is Dream Halls. This is a card. So I'll read it first, but this is 3 blue. I'm going to get the errata for this. All right, the errata for Dream Halls is 3 blue for an enchantment. Rather than pay the mana cost for a spell, its controller may discard a card that shares a color with that spell. So similarly to, I guess, something like Parallax Wave, just it's a card that this came back to the fore when it got put in the Mitgo Vintage Cube again recently. It's something we've been testing out. This seems very much like a build-around card to me, James. What kind of things do you need to consider with this? Because I know that the dream of this is you have a 1 mana spell, you use that, you discard that, and you cast your 10 mana Leviathan or something like that, whatever your win con of choice is. I also know that it can't be colorless spells, so this doesn't really go in a channel deck. It's a different kind of cheating into play deck. It has to share a color with a spell. Colorless is not a color. You can't. That doesn't work. That's not written on the card. It doesn't work that way. What kind of things do you need in your deck to really kind of make this work and sing? Is it kind of, I'm assuming it's a combination of big mana things, but this also, what else do you need for this deck to work? Because this can't be your only way of cheating things into play. I'm assuming you need a whole deck around this. Kind of what does that look like? And then when it's in play, what's your play pattern with it?
Yeah, for sure. This is one of the most powerful mana engines available in Cube. But I wouldn't view it as cheating one thing into play. I'd view it more as having a absurd turn of magic. The thing that makes this different from something like a Reanimate to cheap on mana, right, or a Flash, or even a Channel, actually, is that there's not sort of a predefined endpoint. A Reanimate works on one creature or a Flash. A Channel, you have to stop because you run out of life. There's not a point where Dream Halls tells you have to stop, as long as you can keep putting cards into your hand. Yeah. So I'd say probably the easiest and the best way to use Dream Halls is draw 7s. It's the play pattern of you cast Dream Halls, and then you immediately pitch a card to cast your draw 7 to a Wheel of Fortune or a Time Twister or an Echo or whatever it might be. And now you have a fresh grip of 7 and an active Dream Halls. And from that fresh 7, if you have built your deck right, you will have enough big stuff in there to keep going. You might have, card draw, Fact or Fiction, Dig Through Time is phenomenal here. You will dig into more big spells and more stuff. And you can generally see all the cards in your deck. And as long as you have a way to, once you have seen all the cards in your deck, to actually win the game, this will often be the draw 7s often shuffle in. You can often, use that one card to cast it several times and win the game. So, for example, you might be I've got 3 draw 7s, I've got a Dig Through Time and a Fact or Fiction, and then I've got a Brilliant Ultimatum, for example, is a good one. The Jeskai Ultimatum that's deal 5, draw 5, gain 5. Once you've done that, you're going to be able to keep going, but that's also dealing 5 to your opponents. Then you Time Twister again, and then that's getting shuffled back in. You can keep going. You can cast it again, and you can kill them that way. Or Cruel Ultimatums, also one which is in the Mitgo Vintage Cube and is very, very strong in that role. So that's kind of the ideal. It's also, of course, fine to cast your Dream Halls. I've got this Brilliant Ultimatum. Go for that straight away. And it doesn't have to be a draw 7 initially. You can go Dream Halls, Fact or Fiction, and you've got a really good chance, if you've built your deck appropriately, to hit stuff that lets you keep going. Really, card draw is the name of the game. You want to see as many cards as you can when you cast Dream Halls, because then you can, there's not really that stopping point. Just be conscious of the fact that you need a way to actually win the game in your deck. Brain Freeze is probably the ideal win condition, but really you can do it with a lot of stuff. It's really just see as many cards as you can when you cast Dream Halls. Because it plays so well with card draw, right? Because it fuels it and it gives you the mana for free, essentially, right? So you can just keep going.
Yeah. The spells are the mana, yeah.
But like big card draw spells, I'm not talking about Ponders and Preordains or even Divination or First for Discoveries or whatever here. We're talking like Dig Through Time, Time Twister, Brilliant Ultimatum, draw 5. You also need to either have a lot of if you're building your deck like this, then the next thing, you either need to have a lot of ways to find dream holes, be very good at finding it, or have a good functional plan for when you don't draw it. Because, you can't just be hoping you see dream holes in your top 15 cards from a bit of card draw and hoping you see it and cast it every game. So like Mizzix's Mastery can be another nice little piece that goes along well with it here, because it gives you something else to do with those ultimatums, which are kind of some of your engine cards.
It lets you cast it from the graveyard.
Exactly, yeah. Really see as many cards as you can. Basically, it's a mana engine for a Storm deck. It doesn't necessarily have to have a card that literally says Storm on it. There are other win conditions, but that is how you should be thinking about your deck. The turn when you win, you will be casting 10 plus spells. Another good stud card, which does say Storm actually here, is Mind's Desire is great in this deck. You can because it's a big spell you pass for free, and it's very easy to get up to Storm 9 or 10 here, and that'll finish the game.
No, that makes sense. So say ideal world, you dream halls, pack one, pick one. Why not? Is it wheels over everything else first? Because then in theory you just pick up big spell. Like I'm assuming cards like the ultimatums, no one else is going to want. If they're in a cube and this is all prerequisite on they're in the cube. This is supported. It's wheels over everything else first, and then the rest of the deck follows. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, I'd broadly agree with that. Obviously, if you're in powered cube, power might get over that, but basically wheels are the most important thing. After that, you're looking for more card draw and ways to get dream halls out quicker, because it is a 5 mana card. If you can get it out before turn 5, that's obviously better.
No, makes sense. And I'm assuming also what you're saying about ways of finding stuff. So tutors as well. So like DT would be quite high on your list.
Yeah, DT, Vamp are both phenomenal here. But or you just try and do it with card draw and have another plan. But DT and Vamp are phenomenal. You can even, I have played Enlightened Tutor to go and get dream halls before. It's a little bit, it's not the way you want to do it, but it is one of the few spots where I will actually consider putting Enlightened Tutor in my deck. And then the other thing to say on playing this card, I think, is if you have the dream halls but you haven't drawn the stuff to do with it, like, because remember you need another card to pitch as well, right? It's like maybe you have you have dream halls, Time Twister, but no other cards, and you're just waiting to draw a blue card to go off. Don't play out your dream halls. It's because this is a symmetrical effect.
Yes, your opponent very much gets the ability to do this.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's not like, the point of dream halls, right, is when you have it in play, you don't need untapped mana to keep going off. So there's no need to run this out early and open yourself up to your opponent using it. And the final thing to be aware of, and this can be a really big drawback of it, is that, again, because it's symmetrical, if you're playing against blue decks or decks with a lot of instant speed interaction, even if they didn't have that interaction in hand, if you go like Dream Hall's Wheel, be aware that you might have drawn them into a counter spell.
Yes.
Or you might have drawn them into a way to kill Dream Halls. Or I've certainly drawn my opponent into a Hull Breacher in that scenario before, and it was very unpleasant. So just, sometimes there's not a lot you can do about it, but just bear that in mind.
No, I guess that part of it, kind of, if you're sleeving up Dream Halls or you're picking it on Met Go, you're kind of accepting, you are committing to whatever happens, basically, I think is the fair way of putting it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
No, sick. Yeah. This is just one it's only been in my cube for like 3 months now, and I've not had a chance to. I don't think I've seen it at any point because people take it quite highly because of the bollocks, because of the shenanigans you've kind of gone over.
Yeah. And it is also just it's so much fun drafting these decks. It's like you do need quite a lot of pieces, but I think they can be quite powerful. And it's just because the plays are so swingy, and it's to me this is a lot more fun than playing the traditional Storm decks, because the traditional Storm decks require you to calculate your whole Storm line in advance deterministically.
Yes, there's thinking. Yes,
And I may have a master degree. I don't like counting excessively in Magic. I don't want to have to be like, yes, well, cast these 3 rituals, then flashback by Yargrill, and I'll have these exact colors of mana voting in 10 spells time. So it's fine, it can be fun for a bit, but it's a bit hard work. Whereas Dream Halls is just I can cast my Dream Halls, I cast my wheel, and then we'll see what happens. It's probably going to be good.
I feel it. No, it's, if I'm honest, it's right now, it's Dream Halls or Oath of Druids are the 2 cards I want to see in Pack 1 at some point in the next couple of cubes, because I kind of want to force them and have a lot of fun with them. But yeah, that definitely helps. Much appreciated with that. Right, let's move on to our last card of the day. It's another Planeswalkers. This might be a me problem, actually. Next, we have the Wandering Emperor. It is 2 white for legendary Planeswalker. End of sentence. With 3 starting loyalty, it has flash, and as long as the Wandering Emperor enters the battle this turn, you may activate her loyalty abilities anytime you could cast an instant. As a +1 of put a +1 counter on up to 1 target creature, it gains first strike until end of turn. A -1 of create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with vigilance, and a -2 of exile target tapped creature, you gain 2 life. So I think the problems I've had with this card is similarly to, just going back to the first card we spoke about, to Snapcast Mage, kind of just timing and getting the most value out of this card. Because you read that card, you read it, you're like, okay, sweet, it's 4 mana. They're going to swing in with their 1 big creature. I'm going to exile it. Then I'm going to have a Planeswalker. I'm just going to uptick on a different creature, something like that. Or I'm going to downtick, trade, eat their 1/1 with my 2/2, something like that. But basically, there's a lot of ways with this card, because it's a Planeswalker with flash, that you can get your opponent. Is it I guess my thing is kind of there's very easy things to think about with this, where they're attacking him with a really good creature. You just flash this in. It's going to live because they've already declared their attackers. You're going to exile their best creature. Then you have an activated Planeswalker, and it's going to be turn 5 at least, so you can play your next spell, and then you can buff it up, or you can make another samurai and stabilize, all this kind of stuff. There's many good ways of working with this. But when is it not right to do that? And when should you just play this out on their turn and -1 and make a samurai, and then just have a vigilance thing to just start chipping away at damage for? Kind of where do you draw the line with that, James?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a rule of thumb, you mostly know when you pass the turn, right? If you have a pretty good idea if they're going to be attacking you with a creature that turn, right? So generally, if you're passing the turn with Wandering Emperor up, you should already have a plan about what you're doing with it, right? So maybe, you're looking at Wandering Emperor and a sorcery speed 4-drop in your hand, say. You can make a pretty informed decision about, okay, they have this, Hellrider in play, and I want to play Wandering Emperor and eat Hellrider this turn, great. Or if their board is clear, then you might be like, oh, well, I want to tap out for my creature or whatever on my turn. Also fine. Of course, it's possible for that plan to get disrupted. Maybe they decide to play around the Wandering Emperor. It can be quite an easy card to read sometimes if you don't have a lot of other instant speed stuff in your deck. If you pass the turn intended with Wandering Emperor and you don't have a creature to exile or whatever, I'd almost always, if I don't have anything else to do, I'll almost always just play it end step and make a 2/2, because you can't really be wasting 4 mana repeatedly. And it's a very fine threat to just flash in end step. I'll say this card gets a lot better if you have other stuff to do with your mana at instant speed, though, because that gives you options, right? That means you pass with this up and a counter spell, maybe. And if they play something you want to counter, great. If not, you have this really good flash threat to play in pair and step. It can also be strong in white aggressive decks too. It's the other thing this does really well. Sometimes you might want to play it on your turn. Basically, is a really good combat trick. You attack with your your creature, they line up a trade, you give it +1/+1 on first strike, and have this really good Planeswalker left over. And then can keep, and they're on the back foot at that point. You've killed their creature, but you're going to find it hard to attack the Planeswalker back. It's going to keep giving you value. So you use it very differently in different decks. I'd say in control decks, probably the most common use case is either flash it in, exile an attacking creature, and then the next turn probably you want to plus, because if you make the token, you'll lose the Emperor. But if you don't think you can defend the Emperor, it is completely fine to just cash it in at that point. And then if they don't attack into your Wandering Emperor, you tend to just play it end step, make a token, untap, make another token. You've got some pretty good defenses up at that point to defend your Wandering Emperor and block any attackers.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. I didn't think about the fact that if you're just playing this on an empty board, when you pass back to your opponent, you'll have 2 samurais in play and this on 1 loyalty. That's probably still quite good.
Yeah, 100%. And the samurais having vigilance is really nice.
One of them can in theory attack the turn that you untap with this, basically, because you flashed in on their turn. That's cool. That makes sense. In terms of, I understand this could very much be game dependent, but this situation you mentioned where you have this Anakin counterspell, what's going through your head when, like, say, they attack with a fine creature? Say they go through main phase, play a land, combat, swing at you with a 3/3. You have this and a counterspell in hand. Do you think most of the time you are, and it's obviously turn 4 or 5, they haven't played a spell yet, are you going to be slamming this and eating it, or are you going to be leaving up the potential of countering their post-combat spell? If they don't do anything, then you play this, or are you going to just get your guaranteed value of eating the creature? Kind of, where do you sit on that?
I mean, the main thing that depends on for me in that scenario would just be my life total. Because the thing is, if I take the hit and they don't play something I want to counter second main, I can just flash this in end step and kill the creature.
Yeah, it's still tapped. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And if my unless my life total's under a lot of pressure, generally having the option to counter whatever they play second main would be more valuable in that spot. Because it's so bad, it could be really bad for you, if you tap out in combat for this when you didn't really need to, and then they slam some terrifying 5-drop and you die.
Cool. Yeah, I think we might need to do the next level up on just how to play with planeswalkers, I've realised. But
did we go to advanced tiers? Do we have to add a loyalty counter if it's +1? Cheers. Thank you. Yeah, no worries.
So that's where we're going to leave our main topic for the day. But do let us know on Twitter if there's any cards you would like us to have a look at for the future. I will definitely have made a Twitter for the podcast by the time this has come out. It'll be in the description below. If there's any cards you want us to chat about in the future, do let us know. We will put a link to our Twitter that I will definitely make down in the description below, as well as a link to my own personal one as well.
You can also find me on Twitter at JamesAndrewMTG. I can be found occasionally posting about Limited and Cube from time to time.
Good man. Nice. All right, well, let's move on to our final topic of the day. What have we been playing? So, we haven't done a cube since the last one. I think we just... It's that time of year. It's December. Things are a little bit busy. We have some spice stuff coming up. We have a Chaos draft in a couple of weeks, and then we're hoping to get one more cube in before Christmas. But what have you been up to, James? What have you been playing in the world of Magic?
Yeah, not a little bit of Ixalan Limited online, but kind of through with that format at this point. Had some fun doing 4-player Grixis Cube last weekend. Had a nice trio with sort of Rakdos disruptive deck with Vault Key and Lelio and Fable and stuff. That was great. I did almost managed to unlock the achievement of assembling Vault Key and losing, which was an interesting one.
Surely it's just tap the Vault Key. Did you forget? What happened, James? What happened?
The issue was that when I put together Vault Key, my opponent had a lot of blockers. I didn't have much board state, and I had 7 or 8 cards left in my deck.
Oh.
And it doesn't... I was a bit unsure if I could actually piece together winning the game. I think I drew on the last possible turn the important card, which was, so I had the Reflection of Kiki-Jiki, the flipped fable,
Yes.
in play, and then drew Saheeli, and then you Saheeli make one of the servos into another reflection. And then it took me a while to figure this out. And then you have to crucially go to your end step, so they go away in the next end step. And then you can go reflection, copy, reflection, get another reflection, copy, reflection again. You pay a mana each time, so it's not infinite. But you can make a whole bunch of tapped reflection of Kiki-Jikis in end step. And then you go to the next turn, you have one turn to attack with them.
Okay.
And I could make just enough of those to kill over the two turns where I could activate my Saheeli. It was great. It was a good nail biter. So I just played the Time Vault with a Voltaic key and expected my opponent to concede. And then it's okay. And I was oh, you want me to keep taking game actions? Oh, I don't have a lot of cards left, I see.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty baller. I assemble Time Vault key. I concede.
Yeah.
Yeah. No one expects that, but yeah. No, nicely done there. Nicely done. Yeah, the main bit of Magic I've been playing, I played a bit of Commander last weekend. That was good. Built my favorite kind of deck, Golgari cards I like.
Nice.
Grist as the commander. Had a lovely time with that. It is just Golgari cards I like. And yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. As always, in any kind of self-melee sacrifice kind of deck, it's a Conrad, which is the most broken card.
Yeah.
That card is just great. That's kind of, I won a game by, what's there's a few of them that kind of basically, they just put creatures from your graveyard back on top of your library. There was one from Eldraine, one in the black, put any number of creature cards from your graveyard back on top of your library.
Oh, yeah.
So with Sir Conrad, it drained everyone for one when I did that. But obviously I put the insects on top and then plussed Grist and melted them back into the graveyard and then played another one and did it again, and it was all, all phenomenal.
Whenever I've played Conrad in a deck, it's been phenomenal. I think that's with me remembering maximum 50% of the trigger. And it's still great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's whenever a creature goes to the graveyard from anywhere, but it's anyone's creatures as well. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's if you look at your graveyard, if they lose a life. If someone puts a beer down next to the graveyard, they lose a life. Exactly. They're always dead. Is the main thing I've learned.
No, exactly. And the other deck I played was I built that Golem Patient Plotter and playtest card that Gavin Verhey made from GP Barcelona. The bad steal your opponent's creatures and make them into your commander. If you want to see a deck tech on that, it'll be on 2 Sweet MTG by the time this comes out. It's a lot of fun. It has the nice thing with it of you can't steal your opponent's commanders unless they let you. So once you explain that to your opponents, they're kind of more fine with you playing the theft deck. But you can steal your opponent's creatures or legendary creatures and make them into your commander. That's quite fun. So,
oh, nice.
But yeah, there'll be a bit more about that on the YouTube channel, so do check that out as well. But I think that is going to end it for today. James, pleasure as always, man. Thank you very much.
Yep, always good.
Nice one. It just leaves me to thank you all very much for listening out there. Please make sure you like the podcast, give us a 5-star review, all that good stuff. Tell a friend. It would really help us out. But until next time, it's goodbye from me, it's goodbye from James, and we'll see you all soon. Goodbye.